The sky above Frontier Valley in central Wyoming was always a canvas for drama. On this scorching afternoon in 1883, it was painted in faded blue-gray tones, as if the very air was preparing for a storm. It was then that Elijah Blackwood first saw her. He was sitting on the porch of his shack, carved directly into the rock, sharpening an old hunting knife, when a figure appeared on the trail leading to his secluded sanctuary. It was a woman, which was a rarity in these deserted lands, but no less striking was her appearance. She moved, leaning on a broken branch, as if every step was an incredible struggle. On her shoulder, wrapped in dirty cloth, a dark stain spread. Elijah, who at 40-something looked more like a living rock than a man, had a face that could terrify. Thick, coarse hair the color of a raven's wing, matted under an old leather headband, framed his weathered face. His eyes, a piercing blue, seemed like shards of a glacier, and his beard was thick and untrimmed, like a wild bush. He was a man accustomed to solitude, and his world had no need for women, but something in a stubborn, emaciated silhouette made him not just stay put, but tense, as if preparing for an encounter with a bear. When she came closer, he saw her face, drenched in sweat and dirt, but even through that mask of despair, a delicate, aristocratic beauty shone through. Her hair, the color of dark gold, was tangled, and her once white dress, now tattered and stained, did not hide her gaunt figure. She collapsed a few steps from his home, and Elijah, without a word, lifted her into his arms. She was as light as a skeleton, and her body, hot as a furnace, burned his palms. He felt her flinch as she heard his low, guttural voice. "Easy now, you're safe." Her name was Isabella. She was the sole survivor of an attack on the caravan in which she was traveling to meet her husband. The bandits not only robbed them, but also set the wagons on fire, leaving no one alive but her. When Elijah bandaged her wound, he noticed a thin gold ring on her ring finger and a delicate crucifix pendant around her neck. These details spoke of a different world, a world that had nothing in common with his rocks and scorched earth. Elijah didn't believe in coincidences, and knew that in these parts, nothing happened for no reason. He was sure that the attack was not just the work of a gang of robbers, but someone who wanted to eliminate witnesses. He didn't ask questions, didn't inquire about her husband or why she was in these parts. His silence was his defense, but he also knew he couldn't leave her alone. His own life was full of pain and loss, and he couldn't allow another innocent person to die. Days turned into weeks. Elijah nursed her back to health, sharing his food and water, and over time, a strange, tense trust grew between them. Isabella was as fragile as a flower, but there was a steely glint in her eyes. She had a clear, melodious voice that she rarely used. He liked how she looked at him, how attentively she listened when he talked about the mountains and how to survive in this harsh world. He understood that her beauty and refinement were just a mask, hiding a tormented and devastated soul. He saw how she tried to hide her suffering, how she struggled with the memories of that terrible day. One night, as a hurricane raged against the walls of their shelter, Isabella woke up from a nightmare. She screamed, and Elijah, without hesitation, held her to his chest, trying to calm her down. She cowered in his arms like a frightened animal. Her thin, hot fingers clutched at his shirt, and her breathing was ragged and fast. They'll come back for me," she whispered. "They want me dead." Elijah didn't answer, he just held her tighter. He knew it was true. Whoever her enemy was, they wouldn't leave her in peace. And he also knew that she needed not just salvation, but a kind of protection she had never received. In the morning, when the storm had passed, Elijah said, "I can't return you to your husband until I know who's hunting you." He stepped towards her, his face grim and his eyes, as always, filled with cold determination. "But I can protect you here, until you can be safe." He took another step toward her. She flinched but didn't back away. He looked directly into her eyes, his voice low and rumbling like a rock slide. "Until a son is born, your body is mine." Fear flickered in her eyes, but she didn't retreat. She looked at him, and her eyes, as blue as his, were filled not with fear, but with defiance. "I'm ready," she said, and her voice held the same resolve as his. "But know this, I'm not just a body, I'm a soul too." He nodded. He knew. And that was what made everything even more complicated. Days in Elijah's stone house turned into a trial. Their silence became palpable, thick as the dust in the gorge, and filled with mutual tension. They existed side by side, like two wild beasts cornered in the same cave. Isabella, fragile in appearance, turned out to be not just a survivor, but a person with a heart and spirit. She obeyed all his instructions, helping around the house, but every step, every movement was filled with a hidden determination. In her eyes, which Elijah saw every time she passed by, there was not submission, but defiance, as if she was saying, "You can keep me within these walls, but you won't break my will." Elijah himself couldn't understand what was happening to him. This woman, whose presence was an unwelcome intrusion into his solitary world, was slowly but surely changing him. He was accustomed to hardship and loneliness, and now his days were filled with her quiet breathing, her fragile figure in the doorway, her scent, the smell of dry herbs, and something else, an elusive tenderness. He caught himself listening for her footsteps, his gaze involuntarily seeking her out when she went for firewood, water the spring. And this thought, that someone else could be here, in his world, stirred a storm of contradictory emotions within him. He felt anger, because his habitual life had been disrupted, and at the same time, something else, warmer and unfamiliar. Isabella didn't know his past, didn't ask about it. She saw only a man who had saved her, and at the same time, held her captive. He was a mystery to her, a rock that couldn't be moved. But her female intuition told her that beneath this rough exterior lay a deep, long-forgotten pain. She watched him as he worked. His strong, scarred hands skillfully handled any task, whether it was mending an old trap or preparing meat. He moved smoothly and silently, like a predator. His skin, tanned to the color of cured leather, contrasted with his piercing blue eyes, which seemed to see right through everything. The only one he was truly gentle with was his dog, named Colt, an old, loyal companion who never left his master's side. It was in these moments, when Elijah stroked the dog's back or shared a piece of jerky, that Isabella saw glimpses of his true nature. One day, when Elijah returned from a hunt, he found Isabella trying to mend his worn-out shirt. Her slender fingers clumsily held the needle, and she frowned in concentration. He stopped in the doorway, and she, raising her head, met his intense gaze. "I can teach you," he said, and his voice sounded unexpectedly soft. That evening, by the light of a kerosene lamp, he taught her how to hold the needle correctly, how to make even stitches, and she hung on his every word as if it were the most important knowledge in the world. They sat in silence, broken only by the creak of the thread, and in that moment, the tension that had been between them disappeared. It was on that night, when their hands accidentally touched, that Elijah felt a shiver run through his body. He pulled away, trying to regain his composure, but it was too late. He realized that this woman was not just a random guest, but a catalyst for the changes he had so long avoided. For the first time in years, his soul was filled not with a sense of despair, but with a feeling of deep unease. He didn't know how to handle it, and his mind, accustomed to the rigid rules of survival, simply couldn't find a solution. He felt his heart tighten, as if he had been wounded again. Only this time the wound was not on his body, but in his soul. He knew he had to be strong, that he had to protect her, but he didn't know how to protect himself from her. The next morning, when Elijah went to the river to wash dishes, he found footprints near the water. They were boot prints that didn't belong to him. His heart froze. He knew they couldn't be the tracks of a lost traveler. Someone was watching him. He quickly returned to the house, his gaze like that of a cornered animal. He went up to Isabella and grabbed her hand. His eyes were filled with primal terror. "Who are they?" he roared. Isabella flinched. "I don't know what you're talking about," she whispered. "Don't lie to me." His voice was like thunder. He saw not only fear in her eyes, but something else, something he couldn't understand. Suddenly, he felt a pain in his neck and lost consciousness. Elijah awoke to a sharp pain in the back of his head and the damp cold that had soaked his clothes. His body was immobile, his arms and legs bound tightly with leather straps. A coarse rope around his neck was tied to a ceiling beam, holding him in a semi-sitting position so he couldn't stand or lie down comfortably. The first thing he saw was the ceiling of his own shack, with its sooty beams and cracks. The second thing he heard was a familiar but alien voice, Isabella's. She stood by the hearth, her hands were free, and her face, wiped clean of dust and sweat, was pale and tense. Across from her, in the armchair Elijah had carved himself from oak, sat a tall, bony man. His face, long and sharp, with an aquiline nose, was covered with a short, stiff mustache. He was dressed in a dark, well-made suit, and his fingers nervously played with a gold watch on a chain. Standing next to him was another man, younger and stockier, with short, tousled hair and a predatory gaze. At the entrance to the shack, like a guard, stood a third, hunched and silent man. "You were right, sister," said the bony man, his voice dry and sharp as the rustle of sand. "This savage isn't as simple as he seems. He put up a fight. It's a shame we'll have to kill him, but in this world, there's always a price to pay." At that moment, Elijah felt his heart clench. He didn't feel rage, only a deafening, paralyzing shock. Shock that his only sanctuary, his fortress, had been destroyed from the inside. He looked at Isabella, and her gaze, full of guilt and despair, answered his silent question. "Brother," her voice wavered, "don't. He saved me." He didn't know. The bony man smirked, his face contorted into a grimace of contempt. "Didn't know. He knew perfectly well who you were, Isabella. He took you as if you were an object, like an animal. He said those words that I should have said." At that moment, Elijah understood. This wasn't just a gang of robbers. This was her family, or those who considered themselves her family. He remembered her pendant, her ring. She was married. Perhaps her husband had died. And these people, her relatives, wanted to seize her property and her body. He heard her brother, whose name was Warren, start to explain everything, and every word hit him like a whip. "Our father, old Blackmore, left us a huge inheritance, lands, gold, and most importantly a name. But he left us with one condition." Warren stroked his mustache. "No one will get a single cent until you, Isabella, give birth to an heir, a son, to continue the line. You married our enemy, Brody, and you knew he couldn't have children. You knew it." He raised his voice. "You cheated me. You ran from us to avoid your duty to the family." Elijah watched tears stream down her cheeks. He saw her pain, her despair. She wasn't a traitor, she was a victim. She hadn't run from him, but to him, hoping to find salvation. His anger, which he had felt, evaporated, giving way to compassion, deep and piercing. He realized that the words he had spoken on the first day were prophetic. He was her only hope, her last refuge. But his words had also made him a target. "I needed protection, Warren," Isabella whispered. "You would never have given me a choice. You would have simply handed me over to the first person you found, just so he could give you an heir." "Exactly." Warren stood up, his eyes gleaming with fury. "I found the perfect candidate, my old friend, Jerome. He's a rich and powerful man. He's ready to take you as his wife and solve this problem once and for all." Then he turned to Elijah, his face contorted. "So, savage, you did our job for us. You brought her right to us. And now, as I said, you'll have to pay." Warren gestured for the second man, who was standing silently at the door, to approach Elijah. The second man, named Graham, pulled out a knife and began to unbuckle the leather belts that bound Elijah. Elijah didn't move. He looked at Isabella, and there was a plea in his eyes. She understood. She rushed to her brother. "Warren, don't. He's not to blame. Please." Warren pushed her away. "Enough, Isabella. You've caused enough trouble. You know what awaits you if you don't agree. You made me search for you everywhere, and you knew I would find you." But at that moment, Graham, who was standing behind Elijah, abruptly pulled on the rope, and Elijah, who had been waiting for this moment, lunged forward with all his might. The strap on his wrist snapped, and the rope on his neck stretched to its limit. He forcefully headbutted Graham in the jaw, and the man, staggering back, fell, dropping his knife. Elijah broke free of his restraints. He knew he only had a few seconds to act. Elijah knew he only had a few seconds. He wasn't ready for a fight. His hands were still numb, but the instincts he had honed 4 years in the wild took over. He wasn't thinking of revenge, only survival. He lunged forward, and his goal wasn't to kill, but to incapacitate. First, he pushed Graham away, who was still clutching his jaw. The knife that had fallen from his hand skidded towards the hearth. At the same moment, the third man, the hunched guard at the door, rushed at Elijah. He was fast, but Elijah was faster. He dodged the blow, grabbed the attacker's arm, and, using his own momentum, threw him over his shoulder. The man fell with a thud, hitting his head on the wooden floor, and lay motionless. Warren, stunned by the swift reaction, backed away, but Elijah was already in front of him. He knew Warren wasn't a fighter. His strength was in words and schemes, not in fists. Elijah didn't hit him. Instead, he grabbed him by the lapels, lifted him, and powerfully shoved him against the wall. Warren hit it with a loud crash, and the golden watch clattered off his arm, falling to the floor. Elijah immediately turned to Isabella. Her eyes were wide with horror. She looked at him, and her gaze held not fear, but awe. She came up to him, and her hand touched his shoulder. "Elijah," she whispered, but he cut her off. "Who else?" His voice was hoarse. "Is there anyone else? Are they watching us?" Isabella shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "No, just them. I thought I could reason with them." Elijah looked at her, and his heart ached. He saw her desperation. He understood that she hadn't wanted to betray him. She just wanted to save herself. "You were right," he said, his voice softer than ever. "You weren't safe. They would have found you no matter where you hid." He turned to Warren, who was on the floor, groaning in pain. "Take your brother and get out of here," Elijah said, his voice as cold as ice. "And tell your Jerome that I won't let him touch her. And tell him that, if he ever comes back here, I won't be so lenient." Warren got up, his face pale and scared. He grabbed Graham's arm and, limping, dragged him towards the door. He looked at Isabella, and there was hatred in his eyes. But Isabella paid no attention to him. She looked only at Elijah, her eyes filled with tears. When they were gone, Elijah locked the door and turned to her. The silence in the cabin was deafening. He walked over to her and gently took her hands. His fingers were warm, while hers were icy. He began. "Don't say anything," Isabella whispered. "You saved me. You saved me from them. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," Elijah said, his voice low and raspy. "I didn't want you to leave. I knew they would find you. I should have told you the truth." Isabella looked at him, her eyes full of tears. "I never thought that." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't know what to say. Elijah gently stroked her hand. "I know you're scared, but now you're safe. They won't come back. Not now." She flinched. "But they will come back. They won't leave me alone. Then we will be ready," Elijah said, his voice full of determination. "We'll leave here. We'll find another place. You don't owe me anything. You're not my property. But I want to protect you." Isabella looked at him, and there was hope in her eyes. Hope she had long lost. Elijah let go of her hands and lifted her face so she could see his eyes. "I know what I said," he said, "but now, your body is yours. And your heart. Your heart can be mine, if you'll let it." She nodded. Isabella came to him, and her body, which she had protected for so long, relaxed. She hugged him, and he felt her warm breath on his neck. He hugged her back, and in that moment, he felt truly at home. He had found not just a woman, but a companion. His heart, which he had kept in chains for so long, was now free.